Welcome to the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain Vik, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska. That's @LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Welcome to the 902 podcast. We are here today to talk about transparency in law enforcement with the media. And we've got Sheriff Wagner, Chief Deputy Houchin. Hello, guys.
Good morning.
It feels good to have the shoe on the other foot today and not be the one being asked the questions all the time. And we get to ask some questions of the media.
Well, we are very thankful to have Andrew Wegley from the Lincoln Journal-Star in the house today. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. I've thought about, I always wondered when you guys had a podcast if I'd ever be asked on, and maybe that's because I'm sort of an egomaniac, but here I am. So this is huge.
Here you are.
In many ways, at least a thought come true, if not a dream come true. So
well, I just thought you never wanted to get back in the inner offices back here because you'd never probably get out again.
Yeah.
Right? Is that,
I guess we'll see.
Okay.
Here you are. So why don't we always try to give our guests just a little time to, we want to get to know you. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about, but help our listeners know, where are you from? How did you become you today?
Sure, yeah. So I am from Kansas City. I guess I went to high school south of Kansas City, or a suburb south of Kansas City called Raytown. And yeah, so I grew up there. I went to college at Northwest Missouri State. I graduated with a degree in sports media in May of 2021, and mostly thought that that's what I was going to do. For the first 3 years of college, I was really just interested in sports reporting, and I worked for the college newspaper, and I covered, I started covering like high school cross country, which wasn't my favorite thing, but you kind of climb the ladder. And then I covered the college basketball team, which is really, really good, and the football team, which is really good. And it never got old, but they did win all the time. So it was sort of, it got boring in that way, but I still was interested in doing that. But then the pandemic happened and sports stopped. And so I had to start doing something else for a while, and then started news reporting really, and kind of found that I liked it, particularly like politics reporting, because you sort of got the gamesmanship that kind of comes with sports, but also the outcomes mattered a little more. I mean, at the end of the day, the outcome of a basketball game doesn't really matter. And so I kind of found it to be a little more fulfilling and decided that that's what I kind of wanted to pursue. And then I spent my whole senior year as a news reporter, and I covered the pandemic, and I covered the Board of Regents and the City Council and all that stuff that really sound boring to me for the first 3 years. And then I started doing it and found that I just kind of liked it more. And so I decided that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I was going to be an intern at the Journal-Star after graduating, because I hadn't gotten like a cool internship, and I just wanted kind of an internship at a daily paper, so I didn't work at some weekly paper in a town like Maryville, Missouri, which is where my college was, or something like that. And then right before I was going to be an intern, actually the day before I graduated college, I interviewed for a full-time job because I had a breaking news reporter opening, and then I got hired. So before I ever got here for my internship, I was hired full-time, and so it was kind of right place, right time. They needed a person. They knew I was coming anyway, and so they liked me enough that it worked out. And so I've been here since May of 2021, mostly covering you guys and the police department and the state patrol. And I kind of cover the breaking news umbrella is pretty broad, especially when, the paper isn't staffed to the point that it used to be, obviously. I mean, it's obviously just a way smaller staff. And so I've got to cover all kinds of things, but I spend, I think, most of my time really on, I guess, crime and courts, and also the agencies themselves that I cover. So primarily LPD and the Sheriff's Office here, but also a little bit of the State Patrol and University of Nebraska Lincoln Police Department, but that's a pretty rare scene when I'm over there.
When we were talking just off air, so we're lucky we're grabbing you now because you're kind of moving into a new role there at the Journal-Star.
Yeah. So I'm going to be our state government reporter whenever, I keep saying, whenever they hire my replacement, basically, as the breaking news reporter. So I'm kind of doing both. I have a foot in both camps right now. So I've done some state government reporting, but I've mostly been still focused on breaking news just because obviously it's sort of the off season for state government. The legislature won't be in session again until January. And so, but yeah, so after 2 years and I guess some change now on the police beat, I'll be going over there. And so I'm in my waning days. So I kind of expected, I've been telling everyone like 2 months. And I think that deadline is like this week. So maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 4.
Ben kept telling me that he was going to take some jobs away as soon as he hired my replacement. And that's been like 2 years ago. So, I think that's just like the running joke now. You just keep adding hats.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
So do you get double salary now that you're doing both things?
No, I wish. I should bring that up, actually.
We'll be more than happy to make a phone call to somebody for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is the State House reporting like a promotion?
Yeah, I came with the raise. So
Cool.
I
Okay, great.
It's definitely more of breaking news, I think, is sort of seen like maybe an entry level beat or certainly more of an entry level beat. And so, yeah, this is sort of a promotion. And the guy that I don't want to say I'm replacing him because it's sort of daunting when you frame it like that, but I'm kind of filling the desk left by Don Walton, who was a reporter at the Journal-Star for 67 years until he retired 2 months ago.
Long career.
Which is insane. I mean, I can't imagine doing anything for 67 years, much less, one job. And so
I've been breathing.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah. We'll see if I even get there. And so, it's like, it's definitely a promotion. I'm excited for it. It's sort of, it's definitely intimidating in the sense that like, I don't know anything. I feel like I was finally getting like decent at this whole breaking news thing. I knew who to call. I knew, I just kind of, you really understand the sources, and all of a sudden I'm just kind of an infant again on a beat where I know nothing, and I'm going to have to rely a lot on, I guess my coworkers and colleagues who have been in the industry and covering the State House for a really long time. And then also, Google. I have to Google stuff all the time now. I'm like, who is the PIO for the Attorney General's office? And then I have to Google that. And so, so that's the kind of thing that basically everything I found kind of takes longer now. And I notice after I write a state government report or a state government story, I have like 27 tabs open, and because I have to Google basically everything. So,
Hey, you got to start somewhere. It's fresh. So
Yeah.
you'd be learning new stuff.
Now, could you
Just imagine a day without Google?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to
no,
say.
I think about that all the time.
You'd have been on foot, just walking around the State House trying to figure out who's who and what's what.
Making phone calls all the time and doing all that, yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about, and I've asked that question a lot in our newsroom before. Like, man, how did you guys do this job even like 15 years? Because most of my coworkers, a ton of my coworkers have worked at the Journal-Star and newspapers for a decade or 2 or 3. And I'm like, man, you guys like really had to grind in a different way than like I can just Google everything I want. And we obviously have like insane email access. So many public officials have their email posted online, or even finding sources, for non-public officials. If you're wanting to, write about, like I wrote a story about some ACT scores. And so I was trying to find these kids that scored a perfect ACT score. And so I was just typing in their name, and one of them I, found their Instagram and sent them an Instagram DM. And it's like, man, if this was like 15 years ago, like this just would have been a way
Game
harder
changer
job. And so, they obviously managed back then, but it is honestly probably a little easier now.
The funny thing about that, you're talking about that, and it's like with the police work, if our MDTs, our mobile data computers go down, these kids at this age can't do it. And I spent half my career, and you even, Sheriff, a lot more. You didn't have a computer. It's over the radio.
Right.
It's we didn't even have cell phones at that point in time. Yep. And it was such a different game of, if you had to try to find a picture of somebody, it was an hour and a half work. And now it's at the click of their fingers on what these kids can do.
Yeah, I was just going to say my generation kind of bridged that gap where, we had a rotary dial phone growing up, but yet I kind of grew into the age where you had Instagram and Twitter accounts. And so it's just been crazy to see. Well, you can't call it Twitter anymore. They changed the name this morning.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that.
Anyway, we'll figure it out.
You get to do that when you own the company.
I suppose that helps. Well, speaking of the job, so the reason we brought you today to talk about law enforcement and the media. So what, you talk about sports and stuff, but now that you've been in the game a little bit, what kind of stories attract you as a journalist, or what kind of stories do you like to tell?
Sure. Yeah. I think I can kind of answer that easier from kind of the perspective of the police beat. And so I guess the stories that kind of get me the most excited, there's obviously like, I guess maybe the gruesome crime story that can be interesting in the sense that it's shocking. And I guess just the oddity of some crime stories, and also the importance. I mean, there's not a ton of homicides in the Lincoln area, and so we try to treat each homicide. I mean, we generally, if a homicide happens, we'll have 3 or 4 stories in a week about that specific case. And it sounds bad to say that I look forward to that, because I obviously don't want people to be killed in Lincoln. But when those stories happen, it feels like a good opportunity to tell kind of multiple kinds of stories, because we try to tell, okay, here's the facts, here's what the police are saying happened, here's what the court records say. And then we also try and always make contact with the victims or the victims' families, and try and tell the story about who they are. And so those kind of present a unique opportunity to kind of do 2 kinds of reporting in the same week. And then I guess separate from that, I'm always attracted to stories that kind of hold the powerful accountable. And I think that's obviously, I mean, it's a cliche in journalism, but it's also maybe our most vital job. And so if there's, I guess any kind of issue going on, especially in one of the agencies that I cover, that's something that I want to try and write about. And we've obviously had stories in the last few years about, issues of alleged workplace culture and sexual harassment and sexual discrimination within the Lincoln Police Department. And so those are the kinds of stories that obviously attract you. I mean, if somebody's suing the city over something, I mean, that's obviously, or really any institution. And then, within the last 2 years, the State Patrol's evidence technician was caught, selling drugs that were owned by the State Patrol or in their possession. And so stuff like that, where you kind of get to hold the powerful and accountable, even if it's something less, I guess, serious. I mean, a lot of state agencies are spending a ton of money, and city agencies are spending a ton of money on overtime. And so there's interesting stuff you can do with that and public records. But I guess those are really the 2 that kind of stick out to me. Is just when there's wrongdoing on behalf of an institution, or alleged wrongdoing on behalf of an institution. Those are interesting, because it's kind of, we're trying to give a voice to the voiceless in that sense. And so those are the things that I guess pique my interest the most.
Well, it's interesting that, that you say that, because from the other side, as an agency, and it's not always fun to talk about when you do stuff that's wrong, or, you screw something up or make a mistake. But Sheriff, I know you talk to a lot of our new people when they're starting, when you meet people, and when we're bringing people through our academy process, we're talking to them in field training. But you run through that rubric in your mind of, are you okay? And I'll pick on your paper here, but are you okay having what you did on the front page of the Lincoln Journal-Star? And so there's a little bit of that calculus that we run.
That gives you a little bit of perspective on somebody else looking at it and go, yeah, that's a different viewpoint, and it would look differently to the public through those optics than what we might see internally.
Certainly. So I mean, it's not like we do everything we do just because we don't want it to end up in the paper or something like that. But we definitely plant that seed with our people, because just like you said, there's an expectation. I think that the public entities are doing the right things the right way. We certainly aim to do that, but we're human too, and stuff happens. So I don't think there's anything wrong with local journalists holding us accountable if we're not holding ourselves accountable. So
yeah, and I'm sure you guys have seen. I mean, and I think you kind of all probably know that being a public official, particularly in law enforcement, but also at any point as a public official, especially if you're elected in law enforcement, kind of comes with a higher level of scrutiny. I mean, we don't write about DUIs, but if you are a city government employee or especially elected official and you get a DUI, we're going to write about that. And so stuff like that, we try and hold, I guess, public officials to a higher standard. I mean, we're not going to write about an average Joe getting a DUI or crashing or whatever it might be. But obviously once you put on a badge or you are an elected official, that just comes with a higher level of scrutiny. And so that's kind of where we fall on that. And we haven't had too many of those stories in my 2 years here, but there's, maybe been more than I would have expected where we kind of play that role, and it's obviously an important one.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
So let's talk about a little bit, you mentioned sources and things like that and how Google helps. But let's talk about what steps journalists actually go through when you're publishing a story. So what's kind of the anatomy of a story when I read it in the newspaper, in the Lincoln Journal-Star? What's gone into that from your side of things?
Sure. Yeah. It certainly depends on the kind of story. We have police briefing every morning here. And so Ben was in there this morning telling us about a DUI, and I can't even remember what the other.
The other one was 40 grams of meth. And 20. And then we also were talking about the sexting and getting blackmailed on Instagram and going to Snapchat and sending those types of pictures of yourself to total strangers.
So you kind of get a seed of some information at a briefing or whatever.
Right, yeah. And so with something like that, and the one that I wrote before I came down here this morning, because I usually after briefing, I go upstairs to the third floor, the lobby up there, the district court lobby, and I write whatever I think is the most newsworthy from briefing, and I try to write it in order of newsworthiness because we want to get that out. So when something like that, where it's basically I just got it from briefing, the process is sort of simple. The police told us about this, or the sheriff's office told us about this, and we print it in the order that, what we think the lead is. And so I write it, I send it to my editors, they read it, they usually, correct for typos. If they think, this should be further up in the story, this should be further down. And then that goes on our website, and it might get trimmed for print. It might not make print. It might get updated if charges are filed later today and we find new details in court records or in a search warrant. But for something, I guess we call those blotters or kind of a brief story like that, the process is sort of, report, write, publish. It's sort of simple, but obviously for longer stories, it's different, especially stories that we're sort of come up with our own idea or something we decide to pursue that isn't this is a crime that happened or this is a thing that's happening. It's something that we sort of invent, I guess, ourselves. And so it sort of depends. There was a story I wrote pretty recently about the governor congratulating some top scoring ACT students. And the story was kind of about that, but also about brain drain, which is kind of a big talking point in the state and the politics that come with it. And so I talked to some students about, why they left the state to go to college elsewhere. But I also talked to the ACLU because the governor's tweet had turned off the replies. And so it kind of raised some eyebrows with good government groups who, they didn't call it necessarily censoring because people could still quote tweet, and I might be losing some people in the weeds if they don't know what a quote tweet is, but it sort of was multifaceted. The sheriff is smiling because he's not familiar, but so yeah, and so something like that. Whereas I saw this tweet, people were kind of dunking on the governor for turning off the replies because it seemed like he was sort of just trying to hide from criticism. So I talked to the ACLU about that. I talked to his spokeswoman who said it was an accident, and then I also talked to the students about why they're leaving the state. And so that was kind of an interesting story in that it took me about a week to sort of get that all together. I'm obviously doing other things every day. I usually spend probably half my day either looking through court records or writing breaking news and crime stories. But so that was sort of an example of, I guess, what we call an enterprise story, where you're putting several days of work into it. You're doing several interviews. You're kind of, part of it is dotting I's and crossing T's and, making sure you reach out to everyone who needs to have a voice in that story. And whether or not they want to have a voice in that story is a whole other issue. We run into that, increasingly lately, where especially authorities, they don't want to give you an interview. They want to send you an email, or they don't even want to send you an email. They just want to send you, they don't want to answer questions. They just want to give you the statement. Or obviously we have cases where it's just, the authorities did not respond to a request for comment. And so, which is unfortunate because then we can sort of get blamed for this, one-sided story or this story that lacks key facts. And I had a public information officer with the state put it to me. I thought he had a pretty good grasp on it. And this was a few months ago or maybe longer. I really have no sense of time. But he said something, we'd rather be part of a story than the subject of a story. And I think that there's a lot of agencies in the city and in the state that just don't have that mindset. They just rather kind of, close their eyes and shut their ears and pretend that this story isn't happening. And so But yeah, I guess I kind of got off on a tangent here. But yeah, so that's how I write a story.
Yeah, I think we're certainly not perfect, but I think we're trying to be, in that boat. And I think we would much rather be a part of the story than the subject, just like a lot of people would, I think. But yeah, it's a work in progress for sure, for us. So you've grown up in this a little bit, Andrew, with social media, but how has that changed the way that you publish stories? You talked about the digital versus print and things like that. So how has that changed the game for journalism?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one that I'm like maybe uniquely unequipped to answer because I don't, like, I've never worked at a newspaper where, the first time the story was published was in the paper the next day. Mm-hmm. And maybe sometimes, I'll write a story on an afternoon and it won't go online until the next morning. And so maybe it does print before it goes online. But largely, our stories are going up online hours, if not days before they go in the print newspaper. And so that is different in the sense that, most folks in Lincoln are not just waiting for the Journal Star to hit their doorstep to know what happened the day before. They're getting alerts from our app, or they're getting emails from us, or they're seeing our tweets or Facebook posts or whatever it might be. But it's also certainly changed the way we do our breaking news reporting, where instead of just writing a story for the next day's paper, which would have been the case, 15, 20 years ago, we're now writing a story and then we're updating that story every time new information comes in. And obviously, an example like on Friday when the police chief resigns, we initially have a story saying the police chief resigned. And then we have a story, just adding more and more context as the days goes on, as we get a hold of more people or as we don't get a hold of people. And so, a line that lives at the bottom of a lot of our breaking news stories says, this is a developing story. Stay with journalstar.com for updates. And so that is this kind of becoming, it's just kind of a constant thing, especially, basically anytime there's a homicide press conference or anything like that, it's usually going to get that line, and then we're going to keep trying to report as the day goes on. And so it's kind of a window into our process. And I don't know how many readers, check back in. Maybe if it's a huge story, they do. But it's kind of a window into, okay, here's what we know so far. And that line at the bottom is sort of this promise that, and we're going to keep working on this. And so that's kind of what it looks like. But we're also trying to, of course, get it first. I mean, what we want to do is get it right, get it first. And because while we kind of work in concert with other media outlets, we're at the same press conferences, we're generally friendly with their reporters, but they're also our competition at the end of the day. And so we're always trying to, we want to have the first story, and we really always hope to have the best story. And we aren't the fastest outlet in the city usually. Oftentimes we do get beat on breaking news stories, but we always try and have the most thorough story and thoroughly reported story. And I think that our readers know that, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel to that on our side of things too. Even if we look back 10, 15 years, just that news cycle, Sheriff, of our output, if you will, to the media had been kind of at a daily briefing, or it was in a press release.
Yep.
Because there was, the public expectation was, I'm going to read that information on my morning paper the next day.
Yep.
But just like the public expectations have changed for you guys, they've changed for us too. And so we have to come up with ways that we can feed that information a little bit as well.
One of the things we were trying to do at the time was, if we have a bad crash, we want to make sure we can get the word out to people. And we used to do that through radio, TV, newspaper, but sometimes it didn't get out in a very timely fashion. And so we started looking for ways to alert citizens of either danger or traffic issues or whatever the case may be. And that sort of was I think the driving force then.
And it's not really competition for us in the sense that we want to be first, but
we want to eliminate a headache.
Yeah, social media affects us just like it does you guys. And sometimes there's good information on social media. Sometimes there's bad information out on social media. And so we've had to learn as an industry in law enforcement to adapt to that too, to try and get out maybe for a different reason, but still dealing with the same type of process.
Yeah. I wonder, and I guess particularly for you, Sheriff, but I guess really all three of you are probably equipped to answer this. I mean, it's interesting to me that, previously you're talking about when trying to get this information out, especially like you gave the example of a crash and if the interstate was closed. And I know the sheriff has said before that it used to take an act of Congress to close the interstate, but it doesn't anymore. And I guess, when something like that happens, you suddenly now have this direct line to a lot of your, I guess, residents or constituents in the form of Twitter and social media that you really didn't have before. I mean, you had kind of the buffer of the media, and now that's kind of been removed. Is that been difficult at all to adapt to, or is it convenient? Or I guess what's that like to kind of, you just don't have that buffer anymore?
I have people that can do that, Andrew.
The thing.
I have never posted anything on Facebook in my life.
Wow.
And I've done that purposefully because of my position. But we have staff that are very, very, very good at posting concise, factual information that we want to get out to the public. And so, don't look to me to be posting any Facebook posts. Even during the campaign, I had somebody else do that kind of posting because I'm, number one, I don't know what I'm doing, but number two, because of my position, I don't want to goof that up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When it comes to official, stuff from within the sheriff's office, on the few times that there's something that comes straight from the sheriff's mouth, which isn't super often, but we'll usually quote him. We'll put his initials on it or something. But we, if you've seen those Cold War movies with the missiles, and they've got the little box that flips up before you hit the big red button. That's kind of how we have his Twitter button set up, so that remove before launch, that sort of thing.
I think it's more like in case of emergency, press here.
Yeah, break glass, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that we started doing our briefings Facebook Live and doing that. And the one thing we wanted to do is you only have so much area you can write about. I mean, and our briefings are a lot longer than what you can write about. And it helps us be able to get our whole word out there that the media certainly cannot get everything there, so that our listeners and things can have an opportunity to go and hear our full message of what's transpiring.
Yeah. And you guys have different content streams too, just like us. And that's not our primary, mission to push content out. But part of the reason we're doing this podcast is because we wanted a little bit more of a long format type of way to be able to explain to people how we do what we do. And hopefully in the idea that we're trying to be more transparent with the public and give them an insight into what we do. Now, obviously, it's produced by us and made by us, and so it's coming from our point of view. But there's just so much more information out there and so many more avenues, like you said, of where people can get that information. So we're just trying to keep up with the times a little bit, but. Hey, I'm Captain John Vik with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. When it comes to your career, don't settle for good enough. Don't settle for ordinary. We won't either. Be different, be better, be exceptional. Start your future today at joinlso.com.
Hey, I got one question.
Sure.
What is the most frustrating thing you have to do when you have to deal with us in law enforcement and doing those things? What do you get?
Ooh,
my gosh.
That's a good one.
Oh, dude, there's,
dude. Yeah, I like it.
There's so much. No, generally,
There's so much. Wow.
I mean, law enforcement agencies are, to a varying degree transparent. And I think particularly after 2020, there's kind of been maybe some kind of reckoning in law enforcement that, okay, we really need to be transparent, but you haven't seen that across the board. And so I guess, largely in this state, what kind of really, I guess, grinds my gears a little bit is one when, we're looking for pretty basic information on a crime, and it can just be hard to get from some agencies. I mean, if we're asking, hey, what happened here? And they don't want to give us information because it's not the crime they prefer to brief on. I mean, that gets to be frustrating. And the issue really in Nebraska is that the public records statute kind of gives Nebraska's law enforcement agencies pretty free will on what information they release. I mean, crash reports are kind of maybe the last thing that's really a public record, undeniably. And so I guess the things that kind of bother me the most is when we're just trying to get information that isn't necessarily even information that would make the agency look bad. We're just trying to report on a crime, and the agency doesn't want to be cooperative or doesn't want to give us a ton of information on that. And it's just, we're trying to do a public service of, we're trying to report on this crime. And we particularly see it sometimes in crimes against children or crimes that involve juvenile offenders, and in certain agencies, they want to be seen as an agency that's going to protect those people and protect those victims specifically. But if they're not giving information that, is sort of part of the public record, I mean, just because a child is a victim of a crime, or just because a child carries out a crime, doesn't mean that crime isn't newsworthy. And so I think what bothers me maybe the most is that some agencies think that they're sort of the folks that decide what is and isn't newsworthy. And that's still really the job of the newspaper. And then also, I guess, public record stuff is sort of kind of an easy one. And I'm not expecting to get access to a full case file on any kind of investigation, but there are certainly, things that I think that the media in the public should really have access to, that the law enforcement agencies often use the investigatory exception to the state's public record statute to not release information. Specifically, you see it happen somewhat frequently with, body-worn camera footage. I'm not sure any reporter in the state has successfully acquired body-worn camera footage from a police agency here. Mm-hmm. And so while I understand that exception exists, I think that it's sometimes used in bad faith to shield, what is really a public record from the public. And I think that one thing that kind of gets lost is that, agency can use that exception anytime they want, but also the statute ultimately leaves that decision up to the custodian of the record. So it's not that body-worn camera footage or whatever police record is exempt from the law. It's that they're using that exception to exempt it. It's not that it's, state law doesn't let us give that out. The decision is always in the hand of the custodian of records, which, I guess at your agency is ultimately probably the sheriff. And so it's just that it's kind of shielding, it just gives them that discretionary power. And it's so often we're seeing that the discretion is not it's not leaning toward the public rights to know. It's leaning toward, we don't want to give it to you. And so,
I would hope people would understand that there are some facts that we just cannot make public, in an investigation until it goes to trial. And especially if we have a suspect at large and we're going to withhold some information that would only be known to the suspect, and we don't want to give that out. Believe it or not, there are people who are innocent that confess to crimes sometimes, and so we want to make sure that if somebody confesses, they know those particulars that haven't been released to the public for that particular crime. So yeah, it really is our choice and our decision on how the release of that information could negatively impact that case or that court case. And then sometimes we'll consult with the county attorney because they've got to prosecute it. If this information is out, how is this going to affect the prosecution of this case? So there are several factors in play there, not just that, we don't want to tell them.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I kind of posed that sort of a question along those lines to Tom Cassidy, Lincoln's former police chief, and he gave kind of an interesting answer. And I didn't even ask him specifically, but it was a part of a larger answer to a question that I can't remember. And he said that he always thought as police chief that it was his job to either answer a legitimate question, or if he was going to dodge the question, explain why. And I think that there are some agencies in this state that are good at explaining, I can't give that out for, like a reason you just explained. This could affect a trial, and really point to how this could affect a trial. But there are some agencies that will just say, we're not going to give you that. And that's sort of the end of the discussion. And as reporters, just with how the state's law is written, we're oftentimes powerless. And so, that's the thing that is giving me great
See, and we think that the statute gives you way too much authority to get, really, honestly. It takes a lot of personnel, staff time to fulfill some of those public records requests that now is so much easier via email than they used to be via U.S. mail, where people wouldn't sit down and type out a letter for a public records request if they weren't really serious. and then people will get the information and then never use it. So it's kind of a waste of our time. But
Yeah.
And we were, I don't want to say we're late to the game, but in comparison to some of our surrounding agencies when it comes to body worn cameras, we took a lot of time to try and figure out how are we going to do this, and how are we going to roll body cams out to our folks. And so I think there's still a little bit of wrestling with how to handle a lot of those things. In contrast to Nebraska's public records law, there are other states that have sunshine laws where it's everything's out in the open, and if it's on a body cam, then it's public record. And if something goes on at your neighbor's house and you want to get a hold of the body cam, you can go and request that body cam. So there, I guess my point is I'm sure there's a balance to all of this somewhere, and we're on the law enforcement side trying to, on the one hand, be consistent, but at the same time, if there is a reason or some reason that we can be more transparent, we're trying to learn to do that as well. And so while we do wish that yes, there are times that maybe there's body camera stuff that would be newsworthy or relevant to the public, I also don't want to be in a situation where, if we go to a disturbance call at Andrew's house and your neighbors just want to see, well, I wonder what goes on at Andrew's house when the cops show up. I don't know that I necessarily want to live in a community where that just gets handed over either. So it's there's balance to everything, and we're on our side, trying to be, I guess, reasonable and figure out what that is too. So
yeah, we're trying to weigh that, that public information versus the personal privacy of the people we're talking to. If somebody's reporting a crime or being interviewed on a crime and there's body worn camera, we're not going to necessarily give that over just carte blanche. So, that's a difficult balancing act sometimes to determine the privacy of the people you're talking to, or the person, and then the public record aspect of what we're getting. So,
yeah. One of the other questions that I have on here is, what do you feel is the media's role? You hear all these discussions publicly right now, but what do you feel is the media's role in a free society?
Yeah, that's like maybe the heaviest question that you're going to ask, but I think
this is Journalism 101 right here.
Yeah, okay. Right? Great. That's a great episode title for you. I guess broadly, and I've sort of already touched on this, but I think fundamentally, the newspaper has two roles, and it's to inform readers about what's going on in their community, that they want to know about or need to know about. And so, half of it is kind of, okay, we're sending a reporter to the city council meeting and the school board meeting and, the dozens and dozens and actually probably thousands of, public meetings that happen every year in this state. And we try to, make it to those and just, I guess, relay what's happening, but then also kind of separate from, what is sort of obvious to anyone paying close attention. Anyone could go to a city council meeting and maybe come away with a lot of the same information that's going to be in our recap of that or our stories that stem from that. But we also just kind of have to let the public know, about things that the state or the city or whatever agency or institution doesn't necessarily want them to know about. And so it's sort of kind of holding powerful accountable and shedding light on things that otherwise, light wouldn't be shed on. And so I think those two roles are really important. And you've seen that, you've seen that play out obviously in this state, in a ton of different ways. The Nebraska Examiner reported a few months ago on kind of some maybe shady business dealings happening with the state's economic development director. And then, that director resigns, and it's, without the Examiner's reporting in that instance, that probably just goes unreported and he continues to hold that position. And those are things that, you could argue about the importance of that specific instance, but, things like that in a free society need to kind of go reported on. And that's not something that I think happens in obviously a lot of other countries. I think we probably have, the freest press in the world. And I think that's a good thing. People need to be informed.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to, like sometimes, let's just say the law enforcement office agency is not giving you out information and it's an important story. What do you guys do instead of getting it from them?
Yeah, I think our first step in cases like that, and I'm trying to think of kind of a good example, But we also, I guess, always one of our first steps is to sort of try and barter and be reasonable and just kind of level with, whatever person from the agency it is. And I guess I had a story I was working on at the state probation office, and initially they planned to just give me this kind of canned statement. It was 3 or 4 sentences in response to the story I was working on. And I kind of called their public information officer because he had previously indicated that he would get my questions answered, and this statement didn't really begin to answer most of their questions. And I was like, I just kind of level with them and said, look, I don't think that the way that you guys should be handling this story is just to, give this canned statement and just, close your ears and close your eyes and pretend that this isn't happening. And I just try to implore, especially if we're dealing, as I often am, with public officials, is that, look, the public really needs to hear from you on this. And the way around this story is not to just hide from it. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. And so we have to take a public records route, or we just have to report what we know and acknowledge to readers, there's a lot of details here that are unclear because the police department won't tell us anything, or because, this person declined to comment or whatever it might be, or because, the probable cause affidavit was sealed or whatever it might be. And we just have to kind of level with our readers and say, look, these are the steps we took to try and get this information, but ultimately we weren't able to. And it's pretty rare that if all I can say is, well, this crime happened, I'm not going to write that story if I don't really have any details. So sometimes that story just goes unwritten. But if it's a huge and important story, it's sort of hard to speak to that at large. But I think generally if it's that big and involves crime, the agencies tend to know that they really have to say something.
Sure. Well, what are some areas that you think LSO and maybe others locally are doing well regarding transparency? And then what are some areas that the sheriff's office, maybe we could be doing better?
Yeah, I think that I like, especially the sheriff's office's, access to, you guys have all the information in your incident reports posted online. So if I want to know what happened and you guys have filed an incident report, I mean, I don't peruse LSO's incident reports that often because, I mean, as
volume's just different.
The volume, the crimes reported in the county are just different and less frequent than the crimes reported in the city. But I definitely like that I know that if, there is a crime, and I think last year there was there was a fire that destroyed a bunch of Corvettes or something like that.
Yep.
I could go to that listing. I could find the address. I could find the owner's name and in some cases contact information. And it just makes my job a lot easier.
The Corvette owner in the room found that very newsworthy.
Yes, exactly. And I think he's the one that briefed on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff like that where it's just access to information isn't, I don't have to call or email a PIO or make, 3 phone calls to try and track down what could be included in an online report and accessible to the public. So I think that's something that most agencies in the area do pretty well. And it's something that I think they understand that, and I think everyone should understand. I mean, if you just include, the more information you include on your website, the less you're going to hear from me. Like if I've got to call you every day or email you twice a day to try and get basic information, then you're going to hear from me more. And then it, like you guys are saying, well, it takes, a lot of time to fulfill these records requests. And I think other agencies would agree. But if you just made more records accessible on your website, you wouldn't have to spend so much time fulfilling those requests. I know obviously some, you're not going to post your own emails on the website or anything like that, but there's some records like the incident reports and stuff like that there's no reason that a police department shouldn't just post those online. And obviously you guys have those online. The Lincoln Police Department had their incident reports online until I think August of 2021. And I don't know if the State Patrol has ever had their incident reports online, but they're also very good about telling us when crimes happen that we think are newsworthy, or I guess they think are newsworthy.
You said you don't see any reason why some of those reports aren't put on our website. And I'll tell you the reason why a lot of those aren't on our website is because they've been used for nefarious purposes. You know, when I started here, license plate information was public record. And people could call up and get the registered owner of a car on any license plate they wanted to. And then we had, you know, women being stalked by people who saw them in their car, got their license number, had their address, stalked them. And so it's those kinds of events that have prompted license plate information to be confidential, driver's license information to be confidential. Some of the information on, I mean, Tom Cassidy and I went round and round about this back in the day when LPD was going to put accident reports online. And I said, we are not going to do that because it has the person's date of birth, phone number, address, everything that someone would need to steal their identity and or harass them. We ended up coming up with a compromise on redacting some of that information, some of that personal identifiers. But that was a real huge issue then because accident reports are public record. And we just made it, we really tried to make it as difficult as possible for Joe Blow to come in and get an accident report. We really wanted somebody to have a vested interest in either the case number or a name of one of the drivers to be able to get that access.
Well, attorneys would come in too and try to start to get
absolutely.
those all the time.
Well, they do still,
Yeah. I think that accident report or accident reports are kind of an interesting document because it is, you know, it's hard to access if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, but it's been really helpful in my career so far that, you know, all I need is the case number and then I can find that information myself. And I guess I just wish there was kind of a way to have that sort of, you know, if you know what you're looking for, it'll be easy to find. And if you're just somebody with, you know, bad intentions or a bad actor and you're kind of looking for a crime of opportunity or maybe even information on a specific person, then that should be made harder. And I think that's a kind of a good compromise that's been found. I've never had a problem getting a crash report, you know, from any agency really. That's not true, but I digress on that. But anyway, I guess.
But that's not LSO though, right?
No.
Okay, that's I just want to make that
story
clear.
for another day.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's been kind of a good balance, and I think that, you know, obviously the privacy concern is something that makes sense that you guys have. It's something that we have too all the time, especially when we're reporting on, you know, sex assaults or child abuse or whatever it might be, where it's like, okay, well, if we name this, you know, if we name the accused here, are we sort of de facto identifying the accuser?
Correct.
And it's something we grapple with too. But I guess as somebody who's not a law enforcement agent, you know, I'm always going to be kind of advocating for the public's right to know. But I do understand and recognize that comes with other safety concerns that obviously I don't have to consider them to the degree that you all do. And so I guess I do get where you're coming from.
But if we come on and say, hey, this is why we're not giving it out, most people would say, that makes sense.
Yeah. The explanation always goes a long way rather than
just saying I'm not doing it.
No comment.
Or the old, didn't reply to an email seeking comment.
Out on the scenes, because I get the pleasure of being out on the initial scene and breaking news
crime,
and having to talk. Do you get frustrated with this? Because the one thing I could always, 40% of the information we get right away, it isn't even correct. You know, you're trying to weed through it and all those things, and we kind of generic to you guys sometimes because I'm just not 100% sure of what we got. Does that get frustrating to you, or do you understand that part, or how does that go with you?
Yeah, it certainly depends on the kind of, I mean, one, like the Journal-Star doesn't chase ambulances in the way that it probably did 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. You know, I try to, and this is going to sound bad. I should probably abort this answer right now. But anyway, I try to not go to as many scenes as I can just because, you know, if a trailer is burning down or you know, if we hear a confirmed structure fire call, you know, 5 out of 10 of those aren't even going to be fires. And of the other 5, maybe 1 is going to cause enough damage that it would have made the paper if it was just briefed on the next day. And so it can sort of be a time suck. And sometimes there's a crash that sounds like, you know, the worst crash you've ever heard. And then you get out there and it's a minor injury and, you know, nobody's going to get cited, or maybe, you know, just, you know, the police scanner, like you're saying,
right.
The police scanner is not an accurate source of information. It's just sort of a starting point. But so we're pretty selective about the scenes that we go to. And I try to be pretty understanding for the most part of, I know that you're not going to have every detail for me. And that's not usually what I'm looking for at a crash scene or something like that. I mean, I don't go to a ton of crash scenes, but I've gone to ones when we think or know that it's going to be a fatality, or if it sounds pretty bad. I went to one at a bank at like 48th and W Streets earlier this year, and it sounded like it was, it sounded like maybe it was a car in a building, maybe an employee inside the building was hurt, maybe the driver was hurt. I get there and nobody is hurt, but I stand there for 2 hours waiting for the police to come talk to me, and they ultimately never do. And so I just left. And so something like that is frustrating, where you can't even come over and tell me like, hey, we don't know enough to talk, or hey, here's what we do know. But for the most part, I think I'm pretty understanding that you're not going to have every detail for me, because this thing happened 30 minutes ago, and you only know what you think you know anyway. Mm-hmm. So
I think it's important for us as law enforcement officers, though, to train our folks too, that it's okay to provide limited information.
And we've done that by policy. I mean, all of our employees are authorized to provide information within those certain guidelines.
Yep. And speaking, just remembering being in that role as a deputy and then as a sergeant on the streets, the last thing that you ever want to be is wrong. And I would rather be quiet than be wrong. And I know maybe that's not the right way to look at it, but
you're right.
But I think that's what a lot of people think. And they see Andrew or whoever else there, and like, oh man, I don't know what else going on, and maybe I should talk to him, maybe I shouldn't, and well, I'm just going to stand here and be quiet. But I can completely understand your perspective of like, dude, I just spent 2 hours out here, and I could have been doing other stuff. You could have just told me. You didn't have anything to say.
Right.
So we need to be a little bit better, just law enforcement in general, of just having conversations like this.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, this is what we know right now. And I'd like to tell you, I'd like to answer your question, but I can't. Here's the reason why. And I think that's just important to be able to empower our people to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, not so much for the newspaper, because you get the video feeds or the sound clips and things, but a lot of those other news entities, that's what they want. They just want a face on the camera a little bit. They've got that, and then they can go and do their story and then wait for the more information to come. So yeah, when I'm out there, I as soon as I think I know enough, which isn't very often, I like to try to get that information and get you guys out of there and doing what you need to do.
Yeah. That's one thing that I've stressed, to police officials because we have these sorts of conversations, generally not recorded, but we have these sorts of conversations with other agencies where it's like, hey, the sooner you guys come and talk to us, the sooner we'll just leave. And then you don't have to worry about the gaggle of reporters standing, 30 yards from your crime scene or whatever it is. The sooner you just come tell us, hey, here's what we know, here's what we don't, call us back later and we'll try and have more or whatever it is. But increasingly it's been, there's just kind of some hesitancy, I think, sometimes, because I think folks, sometimes are just scared of, like you guys are saying, you don't want to say the wrong thing, but I'd much prefer you come over and explain that to me than just kind of pretend I'm not over there. But again, I really, unless it's something pretty huge, I try not to go to the scene, because oftentimes we get out there and then it's like, well, this isn't really what we thought it was. And then of course we, when we're like, oh, that's nothing. And then it ends up being something, but yeah.
Homicides, crime scene investigations, or, those kinds of things. I'm sure there's going to be a reporter there, officer involved shootings, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Those are kind of fatal crashes. If
that's known,
if it sounds like it's going to be fatal, or if they call, code black over the scanner, that's going to be somewhere where we want to be. Obviously, if there's a homicide, stabbing, or shooting, we'll try and be that. But obviously, too, a lot of the homicide calls in Lincoln happened overnight, and we really only staff our paper from basically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so anything that happens outside of those hours, unless it's something huge and somebody's awake and they see it on Twitter, which the scanner accounts of Twitter have been a huge help sometimes in alerting us to crimes that we wouldn't have previously known about. And sometimes, crimes that would have gone unmentioned at the police briefing unless we had asked. But yeah, we try and make it to those. And obviously an officer involved shooting is one that we better be at the scene at that.
Well, guys, closing thoughts. Andrew, anything?
No, I'm glad to have been on. I think you guys are generally a pretty easy agency to work with. Yeah, I mean, I'm known in our newsroom for, like, I'll get an email from a source that is usually some sort of like denial of, hey, we're not going to talk, or hey, we can't give you what information you're looking for. And then I, kind of go on some expletive laden rants and, yeah, exactly. All the time. And really, even when I told my editor that I was going to come on this podcast, he was like, well, I'm sure they're going to have to bleep you out. So one, I'm proud to have not sworn in my time in this podcast.
I didn't hear any. I think we're good.
Yeah, no, I nailed it. So, but I will say that I guess it's rare that it's one of you guys emailing me and then me having to, say something that I shouldn't say on this podcast out loud in our newsroom. So I guess I appreciate how, generally open and transparent you guys have been. And I can't remember a time in 2 years of reporting on you that I've asked a question that went ignored, which is kind of a low bar, but you guys are I guess a higher bar than others. So I really appreciate your willingness to at least talk. And that's kind of part of the reason I agreed to come on to. I mean, I was excited for it, but also I was like, we expect a lot of transparency out of this agency. And so if they want to ask me questions recorded, I shouldn't really have a problem with it. And it's been cool.
Maybe we owe you one now. I don't know. Yeah. But I think the biggest thing I take away is just from, we as an agency try to be reasonable, and we try to find that balance in the middle.
Fair.
And be fair. And I think being able to have conversations like this, recorded or not, help that process. And, you hear all these things about national media and stuff, but, local law enforcement, local media is still where the rubber meets the road. And I just think it's important to have those lines of communication staying open, because the people that benefit are ultimately the people that live, work, and play in Lancaster County. So.
Yeah, I think we're so lucky. Our relationship with the media, for the most part, is very strong here at LSO and with all the other outlets. And it's a lot easier when you know the person face to face and have talked to them and done that part of it. And I think it just helps the overall quality of what we're both trying to do. And one of them is we're trying to solve crime, and we're trying to make sure everybody knows what we are doing here at LSO, and that we are keeping ourselves at the standard that we need to be.
One of the things that, we have all attended seminars about communications and, media relations and all that sort of thing, over the years. And one of the things that we have heard time and time again on these national news topics like school shootings or those kinds of things is, if you haven't fostered a working relationship with your local media, the people from Atlanta or Washington, D.C. or New York could care less about you. But it's the local folks who will tell the story the way you'd like to have it told, and that will treat you better than somebody that just come in with their satellite truck and then will be gone the next day. And so, hopefully we won't have a national news event, but if we do, we're going to rely on our local news outlets to supply that information to their affiliates, and not have to deal with the piranhas out there, from the.
Yeah, I mean, we've even talked about how we will go about doing that and how the access would be allowed. And yeah, like you said, you want to take care of your own news media here and then go from there at that point.
The other aspect too is that, it really is a two-way street. We need information out to the public on occasion, missing persons, wanted people, safety and security of the community for whatever reason. And so, we rely on the media a lot, in addition to social media, to get the word out that we're looking for this child or this person or whatever the case may be, and it's helpful for us to have that ability to get the word out. So
yeah, all three of us went to FBI National Academy, and they have a whole course just on how to deal with the media and what to do on that part of it, and how to work with them and how to get your message out so that it helps you the best on doing those things that you just mentioned.
Well, Andrew, we just really want to thank you and the Lincoln Journal-Star for taking time out of your busy day to come in and shed a little light on this issue. But just Thanks so much for spending the time.
Good luck on your new position too.
Yeah, as soon as we get you trained up, you go and take a promotion.
You're gonna leave us. We're gonna have to train the next one up.
Well, yeah. You guys will have to. I don't know, who or when or how, but I'm sure that they'll hopefully enjoy the same, I guess, access that I did. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. And with that, Andrew Wegley has left the building. We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the 902 podcast, highlighting the importance of transparency between law enforcement and the media. It's one of the big reasons that we do the 902 podcast, to give you an inside look into why we do what we do. If you have additional questions about the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, please reach out to us by email at lso@lancaster.ne.gov. If you're interested in learning more about careers at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, head out to joinlso.com, where you can find information about all the career opportunities that we offer here, along with a link at the bottom of the page to get directly in touch with a recruiter, where you can text back and forth and ask additional questions. Be sure to subscribe to the 902 podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you enjoy podcasts to catch all of our future episodes and past episodes. Again, thanks for listening.